I did not set out to be a public voice. For a long time, I watched culture move, arguments flare, and institutions strain, mostly from a distance. I had thoughts, certainly, but I kept them private. I assumed others were saying what needed to be said and saying it better than I could. Then I watched what happened to Charlie Kirk. Not just criticism, not disagreement, but threats, targeting, and most disturbingly, moments where the idea of violence against a speaker was minimized, excused, or even celebrated by some because of what he believed and what he said out loud. That moment landed differently for me. It was not about whether I agreed with Charlie Kirk on every point. It was about the realization that when speech becomes dangerous, silence becomes tempting. And when silence becomes tempting, something essential to a free society is already eroding. I had listened to very little of his content before that moment. Afterward, I listened more carefully, not to imitate him, not to adopt his conclusions wholesale, but to understand why his voice resonated so strongly with so many and why it provoked such intense hostility from others. What I heard was not just politics, it was culture, it was anxiety, it was a diagnosis of a society that feels unmoored. One of the themes that stood out most clearly was the idea of moral and cultural decline. Kirk often argues that American society is losing a shared sense of virtue, particularly around sexuality, family structure, and personal responsibility. He frames this not as a minor disagreement, but as a civilizational concern. Whether one agrees or not, it is hard to deny that many people feel disoriented by how quickly norms have changed and by the absence of clear moral reference points. That sense of drift is real, and it deserves to be discussed seriously rather than dismissed reflexively. Another recurring theme is the role of Christianity in public life. Kirk argues that Christianity is not merely a private set of beliefs, but a foundational influence on Western and American culture. He warns that removing Christian moral frameworks can lead to fragmentation, nihilism, or authoritarian substitutes. There is tension here and legitimate debate, especially between cultural Christianity and lived faith. But the broader question remains important. What moral framework replaces what we remove? And is it capable of sustaining a free and humane society? Free speech itself is another central concern. Kirk presents himself as a defender of open expression against what he calls cancel culture. He argues that institutional power, universities, corporations, media, and technology platforms, often enforces ideological conformity while claiming to prevent harm. Again, people can disagree about specifics, but the underlying question matters. Who decides which ideas are allowed to be spoken, and by what authority? When social or economic punishment becomes the default response to unpopular ideas, the range of acceptable thought narrows very quickly. Closely tied to this is a deep distrust of elite institutions. Universities, mainstream media, bureaucracies, and even scientific and medical authorities are often portrayed as detached from ordinary people and insulated from accountability. This distrust did not appear out of nowhere. It reflects a growing sense that credentialed expertise sometimes speaks down rather than listens, and that power is exercised without humility. That skepticism may be uncomfortable, but ignoring it only deepens the divide. Kirk also speaks frequently about national identity and patriotism. He promotes the idea that the United States is uniquely good, deeply flawed, but fundamentally worth preserving. He frames constant criticism of the nation as corrosive rather than constructive. Others see patriotic narratives as incomplete or evasive. Still, the tension between gratitude and critique, between love of country and honest reckoning, is a conversation worth having rather than shutting down. Finally, there is his emphasis on masculinity, order, and authority. This theme often emerges as a reaction against cultural ambiguity and what he views as chaos or relativism. Strength, responsibility, and structure are held up as virtues in contrast to perpetual grievance or therapeutic language. Even for those who disagree with his framing, the underlying desire for meaning, direction, and moral seriousness is something many people recognize in themselves or others. Listening to these themes did not convince me of everything Charlie Kirk says, but it convinced me of something else. Voices like his cannot simply be silenced through intimidation, threat, or the casual acceptance of violence. Not because they are always right, but because a society that cannot tolerate contentious speech is a society that has lost confidence in its own principles. That realization is why this channel exists. I have a lot of thoughts on culture. Some will align with voices you already know. Some will challenge them. The goal here is not agreement, it is engagement. It is a willingness to hear ideas fully, to think carefully, and to speak honestly without assuming that disagreement is hatred or that conviction is violence. I hope this space initiates conversations. I hope it helps me learn and helps others learn, and I hope it brings people together, not necessarily in shared conclusions, but in shared seriousness about the questions that shape our common life. If speech is to remain free, it must be used. This is my attempt to do so. Thank you for listening.